Welcome to Narratives and Nightcaps, books, beverages, and author conversations. Today I'm joined by Ginny Sain. Ginny is the best-selling author of Dark and Shallow Lies, Secrets So Deep, One Last Breath, and her newest novel, When the Bones Sing. Welcome back to our show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for talking to me.
It's so good to see you. I actually saw you in person not long ago, but it's good to see you again. Good to have you on the show. And last time you picked a wonderful margarita that paired so well with One Last Breath. What would you pair with When the Bones Sing?
Well, I thought about that and I was having trouble coming up with a good nightcap for When the Bones Sing. It didn't seem to pair well with like a fruity tropical kind of drink, which is what I usually drink. As a Florida girl, I tend to stick with beach drinks. But I think that the perfect drink maybe to go with this book would be a nice craft beer from your local brewery. They talk about craft breweries a little bit in this book because they're a big deal, like in Bentonville, Fayetteville, that part of Arkansas where this story sort of takes place. And even though in the book they kind of, laugh and sneer at them a little bit, the snooty craft beer people, I think that would be the perfect choice for this book.
That is super fitting. I definitely agree with that. Okay, let's jump right in though. So for everyone, so When the Bone Sing is officially out. Can you give us a quick overview and what readers can expect from the story?
Sure, yeah. If you've read any of my other books, this book is sort of similar in vibe. It's a dark, twisty thriller with a little bit of mystery or paranormal, a little bit of romance. This story is set in the Arkansas Ozarks, where I lived for a long time, so I'm really excited to tell a story that's set there. And it's about a girl, a 17-year-old girl named Debbie, who has a unique ability that's been passed down through the women in her family. She has the ability to hear the bones of the dead. She can't really hear them like as in a sound they make, but they call to her. She feels their call. So her job is to go out and help the local sheriff recover the remains of the missing hikers who disappear off this hiking trail in the very remote part of the Arkansas Ozarks where she lives. And unfortunately, lately, more hikers than usual have gone missing off this trail. So she's been very busy. So that's the basic premise.
It is. Oh, and it immediately, I don't know, captivated me because my husband and I love hiking too, but I love a good eerie story. So I was like, "Ooh, yes." And too many hikers going missing, something's sketchy there. So you've said before, and you just mentioned this takes place in Arkansas, and you've told us before about how your stories often start with the setting. And so safe to say that that was the case with this one as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Since I started writing, I knew that I wanted to tell a story set in the Ozarks. The Arkansas Ozarks are a place that's really steeped in folklore and folk magic and superstition and tradition, in an oral storytelling tradition that goes back generations. There's just a really rich tapestry of magic and superstition and lore in those hills. And I knew that I wanted to kind of tap into that and tell a story set there. But it took me till book 4 to figure out what that story would be. So yeah, that it was definitely all about the place for me with this one.
All of that lore includes the Howler, correct?
Yes, yeah, the Ozark Howler. If any of you out there have read Dark and Shallow Lies, which was my first book, there was a cryptid in that book, the Rougarou, who is the Cajun werewolf. And the Rougarou is basically like a regular werewolf, only with like better food and music. So he's cooler. Because he's Cajun, right? So, and he gets a lot of fan mail. Like people love him. I get a lot of messages about people who love that part of the story, and they ask questions about the Rougarou and his background. And of course, that's an old Cajun folk tale that's been around, for hundreds and hundreds of years. But people loved him. And so when I started thinking about this story, I wanted to put a cryptid in this book as well. And I remembered back to a story I'd heard when I was in college. In the Ozarks, we had a Ozark storyteller come and perform on campus, and one of the stories he told was about the Ozark Howler. The Ozark Howler has the body of a bear and big curling horns like a ram, and red glowing eyes like a demon, claws like a saber-toothed tiger. So he's pretty fearsome looking. He'd been around a long time. Since the 1700s. People had been reporting seeing him in remote parts of those mountains. Daniel Boone was said to have two encounters with him in the Missouri Ozarks when he was doing, a lot of exploring in that area. He wrote home to his sister-in-law in two different letters about this strange creature that he had met.
I remember you saying that now because, like, Why was he writing to his sister-in-law?
Yeah,
We don't
that
need.
was the question. Why his sister-in-law? Like, why is he writing these letters to his sister-in-law? I don't want to like cast aspersions on like what Daniel Boone may or may have not been doing with his brother's wife, but he was writing her really flowery letters that did contain his encounters with the Ozark Howler. And I was in a book thing last week where I brought that up. I was like, I don't know why his sister-in-law, where they were writing these letters, and somebody else was like, well, she was probably the only one in the family that could read. And I was like, oh, that you're probably
Okay, the practical answer.
right. So she probably had to read them then to everybody else. So we're just gonna go with that. We're gonna assume that's what it was. But that Ozark Howler had been around for a while, and then he kind of disappeared. People stopped seeing him, but he made a big comeback during Prohibition. All of a sudden he became very popular again, even though he'd sort of fallen out of popularity in the years in between Daniel Boone and Prohibition. He came back because the people who had stills hidden up in those hills were using those stories to kind of keep people out of the deepest, most remote part of those mountains. They thought, well, if you're scared to go messing around up there because you might get eaten by this monster, maybe you won't discover our secret still we have hidden up in the hills. So he made a big comeback in Prohibition. But yeah, he was fun. He was a really fun element to include in the story for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely fit in so well there. So for this setting, I guess for any of the other ones though, I mean, it seems like you're really pulling off of experiences. Do you ever have to do like a lot of research into the history of an area?
I've never had to do a lot of research. Most of the settings that I've used so far have been places that I'm very, very familiar with, either have lived or spent a long time. I do have to do little bits of research here and there, things primarily like, what is a kind of tree that might bloom this time of year, or what sort of bird might you hear at night in this certain time of year in this certain place. So it's those kind of little specific details. I find myself looking at trees and birds a lot because I'm bad with trees. I don't know anything about trees or birds. So I'm always like, okay, they're out here, they're hearing this bird. It's June, it's Arkansas. What kind of bird is it? So I'd have to look that up. But I don't have to do a lot of overall research. Every once in a while, if there's a little tiny bit of history or something like that, I'll have to stop and look it up. But not major chunks of research, just little things like that.
I'll be right there with you because I too do not know my trees and birds. And I feel like I'm surrounded by a lot of people though that do. And then they're like, oh, like, what is that? And I'm like, it's green. It's green. It's not dead. So that's a win in my book. Like,
Right. Yeah, I'm right there with you.
okay, okay. You're making me think too, though. I was reading this interview, and this was so long ago, and I can't even remember the author at this point. But she was talking about how, and she was writing a historical fiction book, and she's like, my story is like it's very plot driven, like very the characters and everything. She goes, but then there's this moment where you get to, and you're like, when were towels invented? And all of a sudden, you're like googling, like, when was the first towel created?
Mm, there's always some little something that trips you up, yeah. And that's where, at least for me, copy editors come in really handy, because that's part of their process, and in the part of the process we call copy edits, they not only look for like typos and mistakes, but they also do like fact check things like that for me, which is really great to know that someone else is going to come along behind me and just make sure that I've gotten it right. So it's nice to know.
Absolutely, it takes a team. Okay, in each of your books, like you mentioned, and with this one, there is this supernatural thread running through it, but you yourself are a skeptic. So, does that mean, I guess, kind of tying back to it, do you have to do research for that too, like on the supernatural side of things?
I am a skeptic. I'm an across the board skeptic, much like Debbie. Debbie has a line in When the Bones Sing, which is very much a line that I have used before, which is that I am an equal opportunity skeptic. Like I don't believe in anything across the board, but I'm interested in all of it, and I've always been interested in it. Ever since I was little, I was fascinated by ghosts and paranormal and psychic phenomena, and I never believed in it, but I always wanted to believe in it. Like I was always the kind of skeptic who really, really, really hopes to be proved wrong. Like I would love to have a really, really great ghost encounter or to have a psychic phenomenon that I really can't explain, or to run into Bigfoot in the woods somewhere. I would love to have all of those opportunities and experiences. So I'd always read a lot about that kind of stuff and kind of, been interested in it. So I didn't know a fair amount about it. Probably the most research I had to do was when I was writing Dark and Shallow Lies, because the kids in that story, there are 10 kids and they all have a different psychic ability. So I had to do a lot of research into like different psychic abilities, because I really just kind of thought, well, psychics are psychics. I didn't really know, like, they're different sorts of abilities that people have. So I did have to do some research into that, which was really fun. It was an interesting rabbit hole to go down for sure.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine your Google search could take you in so many different
Oh,
directions.
yeah.
And
It also is really bad because a lot of things are like, how long does it take a body to decompose in the water? I'm definitely going to prison, so vouch for me.
absolutely,
Never come and see my Google search history for sure.
I'll be there. Don't worry. I will definitely vouch for you. Okay, in terms of psychic abilities, what type of ability would you like?
But that's a question I get asked a lot, and I've developed a good answer for it. I thought about it a lot. Like, I don't really want to know what people are thinking about me. I mean, I don't need that kind of knowledge, and I don't necessarily want to know the future. Like, life is hard enough without knowing how things are going to end. Um, so there's a girl in Dark and Tell Lies who has the ability of a psychic artist. She can draw things like through an unseen hand. Something guides her hand as she draws, so she can draw. If you have a ring that's missing, she can draw where it is, or things like that. And I've kind of settled on that one because it's mainly because it's the only way I'm ever going to have any artistic ability. I can't draw at all. So, like, if I'm ever gonna have to be artistic, like visually artistic, someone is gonna have to guide that for me. So that would be a good one, I think.
Very nice. You're making me think of a book I recently read too, where that sort of happens, but in
Hmm.
a really creepy way in Hidden
Okay.
Pictures, which I read recently. But that kind of happens there. It's a little scary.
Mhm.
And so, okay, but so Dovey, you mentioned, also not really a believer. She's also a skeptic, despite these abilities that she has. So, two-part question. One, is Dovey like the character you probably relate to the most that you have created? And two, I guess, how do you sort of explain that if she's got these like
Yeah.
interesting abilities, but she herself is a skeptic?
So, yeah, I do relate to Debbie a lot, but I think like most writers, there's a fair amount of me always in my main character and my protagonist. And it's always, nobody is ever straight up me, but everybody has little pieces of me. And that is Debbie's particular piece, that skeptical nature. She does have this ability to hear the bones of the dead, and people come to her for that service. But she says constantly that she doesn't think of it as a magical ability. She thinks of it as a talent. It's a talent that some people have and some people do not have. The same, she kind of equates it to people who can hear a piece of music one time and sit down and play it at a piano. That's not something that most people are able to do, but it's something that some people can do, and it's a talent that they have. It's not a magical ability. So she thinks of it in that terms. And Debbie has some reasons of her own for being skeptical about magic to go back to some experiences she had in her early childhood. So it is kind of a fight within her to maintain that balance between what she can do and what she believes about what she can do.
And then she also has a friend who's like definitely a believer.
Yeah, her best friend Lo is cut from a very different cloth than Debbie as far as that goes. He's definitely a believer. As much as Debbie is a kind of across the board skeptic, he's an across the board believer. He believes just in being open to like all the possibilities of the universe, whether that's ghosts or religion or psychics or anything. He's kind of open to all of that. So he plays very much as an opposite to her in that particular way.
Yeah, it's so fun to see their dynamics because they're so different and yet so drawn to one another.
Mhm.
Aside from Devi and Lo, since they're sort of our main characters here, who is your favorite character to develop in this story?
Oh gosh, I would say aside from Debbie and Lo, it would have to be the two grandmothers that are in the story. There are two grandmothers. Each of the main characters, Debbie and Lo, who are teen protagonists, have a grandmother who plays a big part in the story. There were no grandmothers in the story originally. They kind of wormed their way in there. I just kind of had like an idea, like, oh, maybe I'll include one grandmother, a little bit. And before I knew it, like there were two grand. They each had a grandmother, and they had their own backstory. That went back like generations, and they became very integral to the story and very outspoken, both of them. So they were a lot of fun to write. I also really enjoyed writing. There's a character of the deputy in this story. His name is Jonah, and he doesn't play a big part. He has a pretty small part. But he provides some much needed comic relief at different moments in the story. So he was fun to write just because he was kind of funny, and he kind of gives you a break from the scary and the sad, and and all of that kind of stuff.
Very nice. Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so you have just, I've heard you describe yourself a couple of times. You're like a plantser, right? You're like a middle plot, not a total plotter, not a total pantser. But when it comes to like character development, how do you go about all of that? Or does that also sort of evolve as you're writing? Like you said that the two grandmothers, they weren't really there initially.
Yeah, I am kind of what I call a planter, which means like I don't sit down and figure out every detail, but I know the main details. And then like how I get from A to B or B to C, that I figure out kind of as I go, and I make that up as I go along. And for me, as far as character goes, when I start the story, I have a pretty solid idea of who these characters are. What their backstory is, what their relationship to each other is, kind of what their characteristics and their personalities and all of that stuff is. But I really get to know them as I write them. When they come to me chapter by chapter, they become more fully formed and more sort of fully real. So a lot of times I discover things I didn't know about them along the way as I'm as I'm writing them. Like, oh, I didn't know that about you. Thanks for telling me. They do sort of take on their own personality and their own, desires, and they don't always do what you want them to do, which can be frustrating. But it also can be fun to kind of discover, like, oh, that's not who I thought you were. But this is more interesting. This works better.
I love that. That's awesome. Is there a particular scene or character moment or even just a theme in general that like you're most proud of with this book?
Oh gosh, with this book in particular, um, I think the scenes that were most fun to me for me to write were the scenes between Debbie and Lo. I love that relationship between those two characters. There's a lot of me and my best friend in those two characters, just based on that idea of skepticism versus belief. And it was I explore that every day in my real life with him. So it was fun to explore that, on paper in a different kind of way. So writing those scenes between the two of them was fun, and just the trust and the love and the backstory between them was really fun to develop and figure out kind of as I went along through the story. Their relationship grew and changed a lot from what it was at the beginning of the story to what it evolved into being. But also Debbie's scenes with her Nana, with her grandmother, were really fun to write. I enjoyed those two characters together, and they have some really beautiful, sort of quiet moments together that really I think add a lot of depth to the story. So I really enjoyed that as well.
Yeah, oh my gosh, there's so many good moments to it. What about something that was like the most challenging? Was there a particularly challenging moment?
Yeah, I mean, always, honestly, the most challenging moments for me are anything that involves any kind of like high action, like any kind of like a fight scene or a struggle or a chase, like anything that is really high action is always hard to write, just like logistically, because you're always trying to remember, okay, like whose hands are where and whose feet are where and what's happening, and you're trying to describe it in a way that the reader can read it and picture it in their head, and you've got to keep track of like all of these characters kind of and their bodies in space. And so I always really struggle with that. I wrote a really intense fight scene into Dark and Shallow Lies, which was so complicated to write. And I swore, I was like, I will never write like a full out like fist fight, roll on the ground, like fight like that again. Because I mean, it took me days to line the action and that out in a way that made sense and was, could be interpreted visually. And I didn't skip any steps and suddenly realize, oh, he's over here, but he was supposed to be over there. And so it was really complicated. And I always kind of hate it when I get to those action moments. That's my least favorite part to write.
I mean, I haven't attempted to, but I feel like that would be a huge struggle. I had asked somebody else like something similar once, and they were a fantasy author, and he was like, "I love the fight scenes," and I just thought, "What?" And he's like, "I love them. They're so great." And he also had like he's in the military and everything, so I was like, "Okay, well, I guess that makes sense because you kind of got the strategy background to go in and
Yeah.
do that."
Like, what happens when you hit somebody? Where does your arm go? I don't
Yeah.
know.
I was like, There's no way. And so then it was so I go, so like what was the most challenging aspect of that though? And he goes, well, you're trying to build this world and you're like, does it have mosquitoes? I don't know. Like I was like, oh, okay. So it's just so interesting to like hear everybody's different takes, and I think it depends on the genre too. So I'm right there. I'm right there with you though. Um, in addition to like the mystery and the suspense and the love, or the potential love, your story definitely also features some like pretty complex relationships, family histories, and family dynamics and inner struggles for the characters. What would you say of those, getting a little deep here? What is like the core message that you would want to convey to readers
Yeah,
with
I mean,
this
I think
story?
at its heart, this is a story about things that are passed down in families. Whether that is good things, like talents, whether that's an ability to sit down and play a piece of music, or to hear, the bones of the dead call out to you from the grave. But certainly there are lots of great things that get passed down to us, from previous generations. I like to think I inherited a lot of my grandmother's grit and a lot of her, humor. But there are also those negative things that get passed down in families, whether they're tendencies, toward addiction, or tendencies toward mental illness, or tendencies to struggle with things, generational secrets, things that are swept under the rug and not talked about and not addressed. And there are things that get passed down to us. From past generations that we would rather not be the recipients of, but we are, whether we want to be or not. So at its heart, that I think is really kind of at the core of the story is taking a look at both sides of that coin, the things we are passed down from future generations to families, both positive and negative.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's so much to relate to that for everybody, no matter who you are, where you're at, what age you are, anything along those lines. Such a good and interesting message. In the success that you've had over the past few years with your four novels, and it's just been so awesome to follow your journey, what has been like the most surprising aspect of this industry, or something that like you've learned when you think back to, I know you had like just this amazing, it all kind of happened really quickly and like really amazing for you. So what's been the most surprising aspect of it
Yeah.
all?
I mean, I think what's been sort of most surprising, and fun to see now is that there are readers that come to events that I do, or to book signings, or to see me at festivals or at conferences, who now have read like all four of my books, and they bring them to me with like little tabs in them and underlinings and little notes in the margins, and I love to sign books, for people that have obviously been very well loved, marked up, underlined, pages, dog-eared. I love that. The more they've obviously like messed with that book, the better, the more I like seeing it. So I think the most surprising thing has kind of been how good it feels to know that there's something about those stories that reaches people somewhere. And you expect people to be sort of entertained, and hopefully they are, because they're meant to be entertaining stories. But in fact, I think I love the fact that readers find something deeper in them that resonates with them, that speaks to them, and that keeps them coming back to see what else is going to be next.
Yeah, absolutely. With your theater background as well, if you had, and I know if you had the choice, would you rather a book be developed into a play or a film adaptation?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I would love a play, but I think these books would be really tricky as plays. I don't know that they'd make great plays. There's a lot of water in them, and there's a lot of special effects that would be really hard to do on stage. Um, you know, so they would be a little tricky as plays. I would love a great like Netflix limited series. That would be my personal choice. If anybody out there is listening, um, but honestly, anything would be great with me.
Very cool. No, I feel like of the four though, this one could you we could figure out a play. Like
Yeah, yeah.
potentially.
When you would probably work best to the play. You're right. You're right. Absolutely.
I think we could do it. Okay, what's next? What's the next setting that you're
Well,
working
I've
on?
got I just before that last book, when the Bone Thing came out in March, I found out that I had sold two more books to Penguin Random House. So there will be at least a book 5 and a book 6 coming at some point in the future. I do not know what book 6 is. I have no idea. I haven't even thought about that yet. So if anybody out there has any ideas, shoot me an email. But my book 5 is actually going to be an Oklahoma story. And I grew up in Oklahoma, was born in Oklahoma, lived in Oklahoma up until I went to college. So that's really my home stomping ground. And I always kind of said I would never tell an Oklahoma story because Oklahoma's boring because I lived there, I was born there. But I guess you leave Oklahoma or you leave the place you were born and your hometown, and all of a sudden it looks a little more interesting from the other side. So now that I don't live there anymore, I'm writing an Oklahoma story. It's set in a small town in Oklahoma that has been destroyed by tornadoes an unusually large number of times, and there's a supernatural connection to that. It's about a girl who is a storm chaser. And so she has to figure out what's going on with all those tornadoes. So it's the Oklahoma tornado story, which has really been a lot of fun to work on. I'm really enjoying it.
So where are you at in that process right now?
Right now, I'm working on that first draft of it. It's due to my editor before too long. So she'll be getting a look at it soon. So it's been purchased, it's been acquired by Penguin, and it was sold on proposal, which means they looked at a couple of chapters and a synopsis, and so of course that left me then after they bought it with a book to write. So that's where I am in that process right now. I'm trying to get that book finished.
How close would you say when your book ends up being to like your proposal when you've done this in the past?
My synopsis for my proposals are always very vague. And so it ends up being pretty close because there's honestly not a lot of detail. Like something happens, tornadoes, kissing, something supernatural, some magic. Here's 3 chapters. Tell me what you think. There have been times when they've deviated pretty wildly, but I've learned now to keep my synopsises pretty open. So no matter what I end up with, I can kind of be like, yeah, see, that's what I said I was going to write.
I love it. That's so funny. Very good. Well, I'm excited for that one. I didn't spend a ton of time, but I used to have grandparents in El Reno. Been to small town Oklahoma.
Mhm.
It's a
Already knows tornadoes, certainly, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, but also, I mean, the tornado aspect of Iowa, and I can definitely relate to like having grown up in Iowa, and then you're like, I gotta leave, I gotta get out, and then you do, and you think back, and you're like, well, it's
Bad.
no, it's a pretty good place. I had someone this week though. I said something. I go, oh yeah, and then like from Iowa, and they were like, I think I've met 2 people from there. They're like, I didn't know anyone actually lived there. I was like, sure do.
They do.
Sure do. And they have a lot of tornadoes as well. So even now, I know we're both in Florida. I don't know about you, but my husband kind of makes fun of me because even when we get the rare tornado warning here, I'm in the laundry room. I'm not messing around.
Thing about it here is like we mostly get tornadoes kicked up from hurricanes or kicked up from other storms, but there are no tornado sirens here. I was so confused by this when that big round of hurricanes came through, kicking up tornadoes like everywhere. And finally, I posted on my Facebook, neighborhood page. I was like, "Are there no tornado sirens here?" And they were like, "What?" I was like, "Oh my gosh! Like I don't know what to do. Like I'm supposed to go find shelter when that siren goes off. Like I need a siren." I was just floored. I was like, "Wow, that's crazy."
Yeah, nope, no tornado sirens. You're just kind of on your own, watch the
Yeah,
news. And then, but I'm in that interior space, even though people laugh at, they're like, oh, they're not that big of a deal here. I'm like, I'm not messing with it.
don't mess with tornadoes.
No, not at all. All right. You have been so busy the past couple of months. Do you have some more events coming up still in the midst of your writing?
So I do. Actually, I'm excited because I live in Orlando, so like Central Florida. And people who aren't familiar with Florida, I don't think sometimes don't realize like the massive distances that we're talking about within the state. Because sometimes when somebody's like, "Oh, why don't you come up to this bookstore?" I'm like, "That's 8 hours away from me." So I'm excited that this weekend I'm actually getting up to the Panhandle, which is not a part of Florida that I get to visit much. So Friday night, the 25th, I'm going to be at Bookish Boutique in Panama City. And then on the 26th, this Saturday, which is actually Independent Bookstore Day, which is really cool, I'm going to be at the Haunted Bookshop in Mobile, Alabama. So I'm excited about that. So, and then I've got lots of other stuff coming up. I'm going to be at the Decatur Children's Book Festival in early May. So that's really fun. I was there last year. Then all of my upcoming events and stuff are on my Instagram and all of that, but lots of good stuff still coming up in April and May.
Yeah, oh, you're so busy, but I love like seeing all the places that you go. It's awesome. So is Instagram the best place for everyone to connect with you as
Yeah,
well?
I'm on other stuff as well, but Instagram's probably where I'm most active. So if you're on Instagram, hop on there, follow me, and find out where I'm going to be.
Absolutely. Well, Jenny, it's always such a pleasure to talk with you. I always enjoy just hearing about your entire process. It's your story seems so fun to develop and you're so
Oh,
enjoyable to talk to. So,
thank
thank you for
you.
making us one stop on your very busy schedule.
You are so welcome. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I always look forward to it.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.